Most people wake up to the sound of birds or maybe the hum of a coffee maker. Me, I woke up to the roar of a 2025 Chevrolet Suburban plowing across my front lawn like it was Catherine Dunn's personal racetrack. Yes, that Catherine, our HOA president, the woman who treats property lines the way toddlers treat coloring books. Every morning, she carved a fresh set of muddy scars into the grass I spent years perfecting. At first, I thought it had to be a delivery truck or some lost tourist. But no, the camera I set up didn't lie there. She was sunglasses on one hand on the wheel, smirking as she tore through my yard as if it were her kingdom. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with a neighbor. I was dealing with Catherine Dunn. And if she thought she was untouchable, she was about to find out how wrong she was. Before we dive in, let me know where are you watching from and what time is it right now. I still remember the first time I noticed them. Two faint lines pressed into the grass like someone had dragged a rake through it. It was early March, right after a night of rain. The soil was soft, the kind of damp earth that holds on to every footprint, every paw print, every tire. Tread like a diary you didn't ask it to keep. I stood at the edge of my porch, coffee in hand, staring at those lines as the morning sun lit them up. At first, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a FedEx truck that had gotten too close to the curb. Maybe some teenager cutting across to show off for his friends. A one-off mistake, nothing more. But the next morning, the same thing happened. New tracks, fresh ones. This time, the grass wasn't just bent. It was ripped. Mud sprayed up onto the sidewalk like some monster truck rally had just been held in my front yard. And the thing that gnawed at me was how precise it was. The exact same spot, same angle, like it had been measured with a ruler. Not random, not careless, deliberate. I crouched down, running my hand along the grooves. My yard has always been my pride. I'm not one of those people who buys fancy cars or throws wild barbecues to prove I belong in the neighborhood. My lawn is my canvas. I cut it myself, fertilize it, keep the edges sharp like a military haircut. It was my little patch of order in a world that so often felt chaotic. And now someone was vandalizing it one day at a time. By the end of the week, the one-off mistake had become a routine. I started waking up earlier, standing by the window like a detective on a stakeout, waiting to catch whoever was bold or stupid enough to make my lawn their shortcut. But each time I was too late. I'd come downstairs, open the door, and there they were. Fresh tire marks mocking me, daring me to do something about them. It wasn't until the second week that I noticed a pattern. The tracks always appeared between 7:15 and 7:30 in the morning. Rain or shine, weekday or weekend, it didn't matter. Whoever it was had a schedule and they stuck to it with military precision, which meant this wasn't just laziness. This was intentional, personal. That realization gnawed at me. Who in their right mind drives across another person's property every single morning, who wakes up, looks at the road and thinks, nah, I'll just mow down my neighbor's front yard. Instead, I started to feel like I was living in some twisted sitcom, one where the laugh track was replaced by the sound of tearing grass. The thing about HOA neighborhoods is this: everything looks pristine on the surface. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, people waving as they jog past. But beneath it, pettiness, politics, and power games that make middle school look civilized. I knew if this kept up, it had to be someone from within the neighborhood, someone who knew exactly what they were doing and who assumed I wouldn't fight back. I tried mentioning it casually to a couple of neighbors while we were out walking dogs. Hey, you ever notice tire marks in front of my place? I asked, half hoping someone would confess, laugh, say it was an accident. Instead, they gave me polite shrugs, awkward smiles, and changed the subject. That's when it hit me. Everyone knew something I didn't. By now, the grass wasn't just marked, it was ruined. The deep green I'd nurtured for years was carved into muddy scars, raw and brown, cutting across my property like an open wound. Every morning, I looked out the window, and every morning I felt that same surge of anger tighten in my chest. Whoever it was, they weren't just disrespecting my yard, they were disrespecting me. So I started investigating. At first, I thought about hiding behind the hedges with a thermos of coffee, waiting to pounce like some kind of suburban Batman. But reality got in the way. I've got job responsibilities. I couldn't stand there every morning hoping to catch the mystery driver in the act. That's when the idea of surveillance came to me. Nothing fancy, just one of those late-night YouTube ad deals for a motion-detecting security camera. $39, free shipping, and the promise of clarity. I install. Let it near my mailbox, angled just right to capture the corner patch where the tracks always appeared. I figured if nothing else, it would give me peace of mind. That night, I sat on the porch as the crickets chirped, looking out over the wounded patch of lawn. The camera's tiny red light blinked in the dark, almost like it was winking at me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was doing something, taking back a little control. The next morning, I brewed my coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened the app linked to the camera. My hands actually trembled as I scrolled through the night's footage. Nothing at first, just shadows, headlights passing on the main road, a stray cat or two. And then there it was, the moment of truth. A large vehicle, headlights glaring, creeping into frame. Not a delivery truck, not some random teenager. No, this was a beast. A brand new 2025 Chevrolet Suburban, paint glistening under the street lamp like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. And behind the wheel, none other than Catherine Dunn, our HOA president. My jaw dropped. Catherine Dunn, who wrote the rules, handed out fines, and never missed a chance to remind us she was protecting property values, was the very person tearing up my lawn, and she wasn't even subtle about it. Sunglasses on at 7:20 in the morning, one hand casually draped on the wheel lips, curled into a smug little grin as her monster of an SUV cut across my grass like it was her personal driveway. I sat there staring at the footage, equal parts shocked and furious. Catherine Dunn, the queen bee of the HOA, the woman who fined me last year because my recycling bin was visible from the street for too long. The same Catherine who once lectured me about keeping hedges trimmed to regulation height. She was the one vandalizing my yard every single day without a shred of shame. And that was when my anger solidified into something sharper, a plan. The funny thing about catching someone red-handed is that even when you finally have the proof in front of you, it doesn't quite feel real. I sat there in my kitchen staring at my phone screen, rewinding the clip again and again. Each time the grainy night vision footage showed the same thing. Catherine Dunn, HOA president, the so-called guardian of neighborhood standards, gliding her massive 2025 Chevrolet Suburban across my lawn like it was a shortcut designed just for her. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. The headlights flared, the chrome grille gleamed, and the distinct profile of Catherine's freshly styled blonde hair was lit up for the world to see. That smug little grin plastered across her face wasn't just in my imagination. It was real. She knew exactly what she was doing. I leaned back in my chair, ran a hand through my hair, and let out a laugh. Half disbelief, half fury. The irony was too much. Catherine had spent years parading around the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff, handing out fines for the tiniest infractions. A mailbox leaning half an inch to the left. Fine. A flower bed that was an aesthetically uniform warning letter. One guy down the block got cited for leaving his Christmas lights up until January 3rd. Catherine ran the HOA like it was her own private kingdom. And here she was tearing up my lawn in broad daylight with a car the size of a tank. The hypocrisy was staggering, but the brazenness was worse. If anyone else had done this, maybe they would have been sneaky about it. They'd take a different angle, switch up the timing, maybe at least pretend it was an accident. But not Catherine. No, she drove across the exact same strip of grass every single morning like she was clocking in for a job. Same time, same route, same arrogant smirk. She wasn't just ignoring me, she was mocking me. I spent that entire day in a haze, replaying the video whenever I had a spare moment. At work during lunch, even sitting in traffic, I kept pulling it up as if staring at it long enough would help me make sense of it. But no matter how many times I watched, the conclusion stayed the same. The head of our HOA, the person entrusted with keeping the neighborhood perfect, was vandalizing my property, and worse, she was enjoying it.
That evening, I decided to collect more evidence. One video wasn't enough. If I confronted her, she'd deny it.
If I brought it up at an HOA meeting, she'd twist it, claim it was doctored, accuse me of targeting her. Catherine was slippery like that, always finding a way to flip the narrative. I needed a pattern, a series of clips, a highlight reel of her arrogance. So, I repositioned the camera this time, mounting it higher on a tree for a better angle. I even invested in a second one placed on the opposite side of the yard, just in case she tried to claim I had staged it. Call me paranoid, but when you're dealing with someone like Catherine Dunn, you learn quickly that facts alone won't save you. You need undeniable in your face proof. Over the next week, I got exactly that. Monday morning, 2 a.m., Suburban barrels through tires, spraying G-mud. Tuesday, 7:18 a.m. She's on the phone, laughing, one hand casually draped on the steering wheel as she crunches over the same spot. Wednesday, 7:25 a.m., windows down, music blasting, a fresh coffee cup in her hand, as if it were her victory lap. By Friday, the footage was practically a comedy reel. Catherine in her rolling fortress, treating my lawn like her own personal driveway while waving at passing joggers. I started saving the clips in a folder labeled Exhibit A. I even gave them cheeky names. Queen of the HOA, Episode 1, Suburban Assault, Episode 2, and my personal favorite, The Royal Shortcut, Episode 3. Humor was the only way I could keep myself from boiling over, but underneath the sarcasm, the anger kept growing. Every clip felt like a slap in the face. Every laugh she had on the phone, every sip of coffee as her tires shredded. My grass felt like a reminder she thinks she's untouchable. And the worst part, she probably was. Catherine wasn't just on the HOA board. She was the HOA board. President for 3 consecutive terms, chair of every committee, friend to half the neighborhood and feared by the other half. If I took this to the board, they'd circle the wagons around her. If I called the cops, she'd claim it was a civil matter handled internally by the HOA. That's when the bitterness turned into resolve. This wasn't about grass anymore. It was about power, about control. Catherine was using her position to stomp all over me, literally, and if she thought I was just going to sit back and let her, she was about to learn she'd underestimated the wrong neighbor. One night around midnight, I sat in my living room with the lights off, the glow of the TV, playing back yet another clip of Catherine's Suburban climbing onto my lawn. I paused it, zoomed in on her smug grin, and muttered to myself, "All right, Catherine, you want to play games, I'll play, but you're not going to like the rules I come up with." That was the moment the seed of revenge was planted. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew this much. I wasn't going to waste my time begging the HOA for help. I wasn't going to file complaints that would vanish into Catherine's desk drawer. No, I was going to handle this myself, quietly, creatively, and when the time came, she wouldn't see it coming. As I closed the video files and set my phone down, I glanced out the window at the shredded patch of earth that used to be my lawn. The tire tracks gleamed under the moonlight, a constant reminder of the battle Catherine had started. And though she didn't know it yet, I was already preparing to end it. There's a certain kind of anger that builds in slow motion. It doesn't hit you all at once like a punch. It drips into your life like a leaky faucet. Steady, relentless, impossible to ignore. That's how it felt watching Catherine Dunn and her oversized 2025 Chevrolet Suburban chew up my yard day after day. I had the evidence. I had the certainty. The only thing I didn't have yet was a strategy, and like any halfway decent man trying to cling to his sanity, I told myself to start small. Be civil, I thought, give her the chance to make it right. After all, this was a neighborhood, not a battlefield, at least not yet. So the next Saturday, I spotted my chance. The HOA was hosting its monthly community cleanup, one of those fake cheerful events where Catherine strutted around with a clipboard, while everyone else picked up trash bags and tried not to make eye contact. I grabbed a rake, put on my most neutral smile, and waited until she was close enough to corner. "Catherine," I said in the calmest voice I could muster, "do you have a minute?" She turned all pearls and pastel cardigan, her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. "Dylan," she said, voice dripping with fake sweetness. Of course, always happy to chat with my neighbors. I could feel half a dozen ears perking up around us. HOA gossip spreads faster than wildfire, and everyone knew Catherine was queen of the flames. I lowered my voice anyway. "It's about my lawn." Her eyebrows arched. "Your lawn?" "Yes," I said carefully. "I've noticed some, tire damage lately. Deep ruts almost every morning." For a second, just a flicker. I saw something in her eyes. Recognition, but then it was gone. Replaced by a laugh so airy it could have floated away. "Oh, Dylan, it's just grass. It grows back." You know, the way she said it made me want to snap my rake in half. Just grass. I'd spent years nurturing that lawn, turning it into the kind of emerald green patch the HOA pretended to care about. And here she was dismissing it like I was complaining about a crooked dandelion. "I have footage," I said, my voice sharper now. "It's you, Catherine. You're Suburban." Every morning she didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Instead, she tilted her head, gave me that smile, the one politicians give when they know you don't have the votes. "Dylan, darling, I'm the HOA president. I drive through the neighborhood all the time. Maybe you're mistaken. Those cameras can be unreliable." My blood boiled. She wasn't denying it because she didn't care if I knew. She was denying it because she knew nobody else would care. "I'm not mistaken," I said firmly. "You're cutting through my property. It stops now." And that's when she dropped the mask. Her smile thinned, her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, she spoke without the sugary coating. "Listen carefully. I'm on the board. I am the board. If you keep making noise about this, you're only going to make things harder for yourself." I stared at her. "Are you threatening me over my own lawn?" She leaned in just slightly, her perfume sharp in the warm air. "I'm reminding you of how things work around here. We all make little sacrifices for the community. Maybe yours is that patch of grass. Now, if you'll excuse me." She turned on her heel clipboard, tucked against her chest like a shield, and marched off to scold a teenager for not holding his trash bag high enough. I stood there, rake in hand, fighting the urge to yell, but yelling would only feed her. That's the thing about people like Catherine. They thrive on conflict as long as they control the narrative. If I lost my cool in public, the story would spread by sundown. Dylan George loses it at HOA cleanup, harasses poor Catherine Dunn. So I swallowed my pride, forced my jaw to unclench, and went back to raking leaves. But inside, a storm was brewing. Over the next week, her arrogance only got worse. Not only did Catherine keep driving across my lawn, she started doing it slower, as if to make sure I saw her. One morning, I caught her in the act from my front window. She glanced over, rolled her sunglasses down, and gave me a little wave as her tires ripped into the earth. A wave. Like this was some kind of inside joke, and I was the punchline. Then came the letters. HOA violation notices slipped into my mailbox, signed by Catherine herself. The first accused me of failure to maintain lawn quality. The second claimed my hedges were encroaching onto community space. The third a warning about leaving my trash bin visible from the street for excessive duration. Never mind that it had been out for exactly 30 minutes after collection. Catherine had turned the HOA into her personal weapon. It was infuriating but also clarifying. She wanted me to explode to break some rules she could use to fine me into submission. She wanted to prove I was powerless, and for a brief moment, I almost let myself believe her. After all, she had the board, the letters, the authority. All I had was a yard full of tire marks and a folder full of videos. But then I remembered that look on her face, the smug satisfaction as she waved at me from behind the wheel of her Suburban. And something inside me shifted. I realized Catherine was playing a game of intimidation, but she had no idea who she was playing against, because while she thought she was untouchable, she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'm not the kind of man who folds. I'm the kind of man who bides his time, who takes careful notes, who waits until the moment is perfect. So, I smiled to myself, tucked her latest violation letter into my desk drawer, and whispered under my breath, "All right, Catherine. If you want war, you've got it. Just don't be surprised when you lose. Some people make a mistake once, feel a flicker of shame, and quietly correct themselves." Catherine Dunn was not one of those people. No, Catherine had the rare talent of turning act of arrogance into a performance, and my front lawn was now her stage. If I thought my polite confrontation would slow her down, I was dead wrong. The very next morning, her 2025 Chevrolet Suburban appeared at exactly 7:21 a.m. headlights, blazing like the opening scene of a Broadway show. I was standing at the window, coffee in hand, and I swear she slowed down on purpose. Tires dug deep into the soft soil, mud kicked up like fireworks, and just before she cleared the patch, Catherine glanced directly at my house, rolled her sunglasses down, and gave me the same smug little wave. I nearly spilled my coffee. That wave wasn't just arrogance. It was a declaration of war. From that moment, things escalated fast. Within a week, the damage to my lawn was so severe, it looked like I'd hosted a demolition derby. The once perfect stripes I mowed with pride were shredded into brown scars, the kind that don't just grow back with a sprinkle of seed. My mailbox leaned at an angle after her bumper clipped it one morning, and every time I stepped outside, it felt like my neighbors were watching, whispering, taking bets on how long I'd last before snapping. But the humiliation didn't stop at the tire tracks. No, Catherine decided to up the ante by using her real weapon, the HOA. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home from work to find a crisp envelope tucked neatly into my mailbox. Inside was an official violation notice, signed by none other than Catherine herself. Failure to maintain proper lawn appearance, it read. The irony nearly knocked me flat. She was destroying my yard and then citing me for the damage. 2 days later, another letter appeared. Unapproved modifications to proper. Why? This time, she claimed my garden gnome collection. 3 little statues I'd had for years. Didn't comply with neighborhood aesthetic guidelines. A week after that, yet another notice. Trash receptacle visible beyond permitted hours. The bin had been at the curb for exactly 29 minutes. Apparently, Catherine had timed it. Each letter came with the same threat, escalating fines. First $50, then $100, then $200. It was like she was daring me to push back, baiting me into a fight where she held all the cards. Neighbors started to notice. At first, they whispered quietly at block parties or while walking dogs. "Tough break," Dylan one muttered. Another shrugged eyes, darting nervously toward Catherine's house. Everyone knew what she was doing, but nobody wanted to challenge her. Catherine wasn't just a board member, she was the board. She controlled the fines, the votes, even the email blasts. She was untouchable, or so she thought. One evening, I tried appealing to reason again, this time through an official HOA meeting. I signed up to speak, gathered my video clips, and waited for my turn. When I stood at the front of the room, a dozen neighbors staring at me, I felt strangely calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began. "For the past month, someone has been driving across my lawn every morning. I have video evidence. And the driver." I clicked the remote and the screen lit up with Catherine's Suburban mid-rhyme mud spraying in glorious detail. "Is our very own HOA president." For a moment, silence hung in the air. A couple of gasps, One muffled laugh. Then Catherine stood, smoothed her cardigan, and unleashed her counterattack. "These allegations are absurd," she said, voice sharp and practiced. "This video could have been doctored by anyone. Dylan has been combative with the HOA for years. He's upset about receiving violation notices, and now he's trying to smear me with fake evidence. It's pathetic, really." She turned to the room, eyes wide, playing the victim. "I have dedicated years of my life to this community, protecting property values, keeping our neighborhood safe and beautiful. And this is the thanks I get. Lies, slander, and harassment. It worked. Some neighbors shook their heads muttering. Others avoided eye contact. One even clapped politely. And just like that, my smoking gun became a punchline. I left that meeting, humiliated my folder of evidence, feeling like dead weight in my hands. Catherine had twisted the narrative, painted herself as the martyr, and left me standing there looking like the villain. And the worst part, she knew it. As the meeting adjourned, she leaned close, voice low enough for only me to hear, "Nice try, Dylan, but you'll never win." That night, I sat in my living room, the violation letters spread across the coffee table, the videos looping endlessly on my laptop. Every part of me wanted to march to her house, pound on the door, and scream until the entire neighborhood heard me. But that's exactly what she wanted. Catherine thrived on chaos she controlled. So instead, I poured myself a drink, sat back, and let the anger settle into something colder, something sharper. I realized Catherine had made a mistake. She thought her power came from the HOA title, the board votes, the letters. But her real weakness was her arrogance. She believed she was invincible, so much so that she didn't even bother to hide her crimes. And arrogance, I knew, was the easiest thing in the world to weaponize. As I stared at the looping footage of her Suburban crushing my lawn, an idea began to take shape. A crazy idea, a dangerous idea, but the kind of idea that made my lips curl into the same smug grin I'd seen on Catherine's face. "All right, Catherine," I muttered, raising my glass in a toast to the screen. "You've had your fun. Now it's my turn." There was a moment, a quiet second in the middle of the night when I realized this had stopped being about grass. It was a tone problem, an authority problem. Catherine had turned petty enforcement into performance art, and the neighborhood was her audience. If she wanted a show, I'd give her one on my terms. I didn't want to be that guy who escalated into violence or danger. I have a brother with kids, and the thought of anyone getting hurt over a lawn made my stomach churn. Besides, I'm not reckless, I'm deliberate. So instead of building something dangerous and illegal, I did what any reasonable but slightly vengeful man would do. I read. I called the city code office. I scrolled HOA statutes until my eyes blurred. I fed keywords into search bars and read forums full of other people who tangled with overbearing neighborhood presidents. The more I learned, the more options surfaced that were smart, legal, and deliciously humiliating. There are rules I found and ironies built into those rules. You can't booby-trap a yard. You can't set out things that create hazards for vehicles or people. But you can legally control your own property. You can change its accessibility. You can install features that are perfectly within your rights, yet make it impossible or at least very inconvenient and publicly embarrassing for a bully to continue her behavior. So, I sketched ideas the way other people sketch garden layouts. Nothing violent, no instructions, no plans for spikes or explosive surprises. Think of it as landscape-level theater, a row of sturdy, tasteful planters anchored on my property line, a low decorative barrier that didn't violate code, but made motor traffic across the grass visually and physically awkward. A pop of color, a small regiment of shrubs, a deliberately placed path for foot traffic that didn't invite SUVs. All commercial, all legal, all sold in catalogs and garden centers. Boring to a normal person, a slow, suffocating trap to someone like Catherine. I also considered the social angle. Catherine's power came from perception. If she looked ridiculous, The board would either have to defend her and look worse or quietly distance themselves. So, part of my plan was theatrical exposure. Make the act of driving across my lawn not only impossible without damaging her own dignity, but also impossible to hide from witnesses and screens. I wanted neighbors to look, to laugh, to have photos and short phone clips that made her arrogance obvious. Not to escalate her danger, but to strip her of her staging. There was a logistics puzzle. Everything had to be defensible. If the HOA sent a letter criticizing me tomorrow, I wanted to be able to point to permits, receipts, city code pages, and polite correspondence proving I'd done my homework. I spent an entire weekend calling the city planning office and the county code enforcement line. I printed PDFs of property boundary rules. I saved confirmation emails that said in plain bureaucratic English that ornamental planters and low non-permanent landscaping features were within the limits of a homeowner's right to manage their front yard. Night after night, I sat at the kitchen table, maps and receipts spread out like a conspiracy board. I circled the same phrase in 3 different municipal documents: reasonable use. It was laughably neutral, but it became my mantra. Reasonable use of my property. Reasonable, legal, unassailable. And if Catherine was going to be a monument to entitlement, I'd put up a tasteful monument in response. I also thought about optics. The trap couldn't feel like vengeance to neutral observers. It had to feel like a homeowner exercising taste and autonomy. So, I invested in high-quality plants and containers. I chose something that would look natural in the neighborhood aesthetic. Bright perennials, low-hedging gravel beds that read as design rather than obstacle. I wrote a short note plan for the HOA framed as a neighborhood beautification effort and saved it as a draft. If anyone complained, I'd present it as such a safety-minded landscaping project intended to protect the lawn and pedestrian traffic. I smiled at that. Protecting the lawn, the most civilized revenge I could imagine. There were time delays built into the plan. I didn't want to rush the reveal. I worked the narrative slowly, plant by plant, receipt by receipt. Social evidence gathered and organized. I arranged for a landscaper to drop off materials on a Wednesday morning while Catherine was scheduled for a community meeting. I asked a couple of neighbors, one who actually hated Catherine more than I did, to keep an eye out and be ready with their foe. Nothing illegal, nothing cruel, just a court of witnesses ready to watch entitlement collide with consequence. The more I planned, the more my anger refined itself. This wasn't about hurting Catherine. It was about hitting the one place she cherished her image. She loved pining in photographs, adored being the person who kept things in order. My response would be a mirror that reflected her true face, ridiculous, petty, and ultimately small. The trap would be a slow, civilized collapse of prestige. Gardens sprout, and so do reputations, sometimes for a lot longer than you think. At night, I'd imagine the scene. Catherine in her Suburban sunglasses lowered, expecting the usual shortcut. Instead, a row of elegant planters and a neat bed of ornamental shrubs blocked her path. She'd have to stop, look ridiculous, squeezing past, maybe back up awkwardly, and the neighbors' phones up, the little giggle spread like wildfire. Catherine's expression would go from smug to stunned to furious in an instant. She'd be the one to make a scene in public, a tableau I couldn't wait to watch. No illegal tricks, no harm, just a careful use of my rights and a slow, delicious unmasking. When everything lined up, I closed my laptop, set the papers into a neat stack, and felt that strange calm that comes before a plan is executed. I'd chosen the safest, cleanest option, lawful, defensible, and socially lethal. Catherine had been playing a bully's game. I'd answered with a homeowner's quiet resolve. The trap was not a weapon. It was a statement, and I intended to let it speak for itself. Execution is where plans stop being ideas and start being real. For me, that meant turning the quiet academe. I see pleasure of spreadsheets and municipal PDFs into soilstone, and something that would make Catherine Dunn think twice. before turning my yard into her personal drag strip. First, I tried to treat it like a proper project. I called a reputable landscaper, one of those folks who uses words like hardscaping and living border and seems to think every front yard is a potential magazine spread. I told him I wanted a tasteful, low-maintenance edge along the part of the lawn that had been the target. No fences, no permanent structures, just a row of heavy, high-quality planters, some low ornamental shrubs, and a gravel bed that read as design, not defense. The plan make the shortcut visually and physically awkward for a Suburban without violating a single HOA rule or city code. The landscaper raised one eyebrow when I mentioned awkward for SUVs, but he was professional. He gave me an estimate, scheduled the work for a Wednesday morning, and told me not to worry. This would look like intentional design, not spite. I like that spite looks messy, design looks deliberate. I ordered the plants and planters online and kept receipts in a neat folder labeled for comic effect civic beautification. I ordered sturdy, tasteful containers, terracotta look composite that wouldn't crack, filled with perennials guaranteed to pop color without requiring babysitting. I chose blue salvia and low boxwood hedging smart neutral, not look at me flashy, but distinct enough to alter the path of a vehicle. Gravel went behind them, a neat strip that said pedestrian access only without any signs that could be flagged by the HOA. On Tuesday night, I texted two neighbors I trusted. One was Mara, retired school teacher, fed up with Catherine's theatrics. The other was Hector, young dad who liked a bit of neighborhood chaos, the kind who'd happily film a spectacular pratfall. Both agreed to be on standby Wednesday morning with phones charged and ready. If she tries anything, Mara told me, we'll be there. That made me feel less alone, like the plan had a social backbone and not just a pile of receipts. Wednesday morning arrived, damp and gorgeous. The kind of day the HOA would have branded ideal for curb appeal. The delivery truck pulled up before dawn, and by 8:00 a.m., the landscapers were moving like a small, efficient army. They set the planters in a low, deliberate arc along the exact strip Catherine had been using. They filled them with soil-planted shrubs with clinical precision tamped down the gravel behind. The effect was subtle at first glance, classy, neat, absolutely reasonable. I stood on the porch watching, holding a thermos more out of nerves than need. The camera angles I'd set earlier were aimed to capture the turning lane and the new installation. I even bought a second temporary camera. Nothing fancy, just something to catch faces and license plates if needed. I had the receipts, the landscaper's card, and the copies of city code in a folder on the kitchen counter. If the HOA tried to pin anything on me, I'd present it like a homeowner who'd done due diligence. If Catherine tried to rage, I wanted evidence. If she tried to claim I was being petty, I wanted every neighbor to see how tasteful it looked. By noon, the work was done. The planters looked like they'd always been there, like some previous owner had said, "Yes, this house needs character." I thanked the sea. Rue tipped the foreman and sent Mara a text. All set. Showtime. Whenever Catherine decides to audition for humiliation, she replied with 3 camera emojis and a thumbs up. For the rest of the day, I tried to act casual. I mowed the rest of the lawn with fanatical calm, trimmed the hedges and pretended my heart wasn't hammering whenever a car passed. At 4:52 p.m., the app pinged motion detected. I opened the feed with the practiced serenity of a man trying not to grin like a child who just hidden a birthday present. Catherine's Suburban rolled into frame around 5:00 p.m. later than usual, surprising me with a timing I hadn't predicted. Maybe she was running errands. Maybe she was testing a new route. She had the windows down. She had that same swagger as if to say the world revolved around her grille and chrome. When she saw the row of planters, her face tightened for half a beat. She looked confused, then annoyed, then actively affronted, as if someone had moved the sun a degree to the left. She did not stop immediately. She slowed. She eyed the new configuration with the kind of contempt you save for instructions on shampoo bottles. I watched through the camera as she maneuvered engine idling, trying to figure out how to squeeze through without damaging paint or dignity. She inched forward, then tried to swing wide. The arc of planters meant there was now a pedestrian-friendly path and a clear visual barrier where a vehicle would not comfortably drive. Her Suburban's rear bumper came perilously close to the mailbox. She dented earlier. She backed up. She tried again more aggressively. Gravel crunched. The sound was small but satisfying. Neighbors emerged like chorus. Members called to cue. Mara stood on my porch with her phone up, laughing quietly. Hector leaned against his truck across the street recording. Across the way, Mr. Patel from 3 houses down came out in his slippers and shook his head with audible satisfaction. A dozen phones pointed like tiny accusing fingers. Catherine's face went through stages I'd seen before. Pride, irritation, a simmering anger. But now she was being watched. And she wasn't getting the stage she wanted. She was getting an audience that noticed the ridiculousness. She tried to do the thing she'd always done. Force her way, bully her way forward. This time, though, the universe and my tasteful planters refused to cooperate. She had to stop, park awkwardly half on the curb, and step out of her vehicle to assess her options like a general considering a retreat. When she walked up my path, heels clicking on the gravel, I felt my pulse steady into a calm I hadn't expected. Catherine paused in front of the planters, looked at me directly, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't have a smug wave prepared. Her mouth flattened. "What is this?" she demanded, voice high and sharp. "Community beautification," I said, folding my arms and smiling like a man who'd finally finished an art project. "Looks good, doesn't it?" The spectacle unfolded quickly after that words. A few clipped accusations from Catherine neighbors chiming in with laughter and pointed questions, and the inevitable realization settling over the crowd. Catherine had been using my lawn as a shortcut, and now publicly she couldn't. She threatened fines. She threatened to call the board. But with receipts in my hand and witnesses on every porch, her threats fell flat, and they sounded small petty. Even against the chorus of neighborly approval, I didn't gloat. I let the scene do the work. I let the cameras and the phone videos and the polite, outraged neighbors rewrite the narrative. Catherine had always controlled the script. Now she was improvising in front of an unsympathetic audience. Her every protest got shorter, her composure thinner. When she finally climbed back into her Suburban, she did not wave. She backed out with the reluctance of someone who'd lost a small war of image and decided the battle wasn't worth it. I stood there on my porch as she drove away, the gravel settling like punctuation. The planters would grow and the shrubs would fill in. But the point had been made. No spikes, no harm. Just a well-executed piece of landscape theater that forced Catherine's entitlement into public view, where it looked ridiculous. The morning I'd been half expecting arrived like a petty holiday. I had gone to bed the night before with a calm I'm not sure I'd felt in months. Partly relief, partly cold anticipation. The planters were in place. The gravel bed looked like art, and a handful of neighbors had promised to keep their phones warmed up. It was a tiny civic ambush, and I was oddly proud of how tasteful it all looked. I made my coffee with ritual slowness and settled at the kitchen table, the camera app already open. The little red dot blinked beautiful as ever. Outside the block, breathed in the lazy way suburban streets do on a Saturday. Dog walkers, joggers, mail trucks. Every ordinary sound felt like the quiet before a small, satisfying storm. At 7:19 a.m., the Suburban rolled into view. Catherine was at the wheel, of course, sunglasses on, scarf, tied with an air of deliberate elegance, the kind of outfit that says, "I did not accidentally roll through a yard." She slowed as she approached, perhaps noticing the new look, perhaps thinking, as she always did, that she could muscle through whatever obstacle a mere homeowner set up. That confidence had cost her before. It was about to cost her the last remnants of dignity. She gave a little huff when she reached the planters. For a moment she sat there, the engine idling like a queen, deciding whether to deign to step over a hedge. Then she did what she always did. When confronted with inconvenience, she attempted to make it her problem, not hers. She pulled forward tires, slipping slightly on the gravel, and that's when small chaos unfurled. The Suburban's bumper clipped the edge of one of the planters. There was a muffled clunk, a tiny spray of soil, a cough of gravel. Catherine cursed softly at first, then louder, and the sound carried across the street like the crack of a poorly timed punchline. People looked up. A dog started barking. The way she looked at that toppled planter was the exact expression I'd been daydreaming about, bewildered fury mixed with the dawning realization that the world was not built to accommodate her every whim. She tried to correct to reverse with the practiced arrogance of someone used to bullying both people and mundanity into submission. The Suburban complained, gravel crunching like popcorn, and then the engine shuddered in a way that made her face blanch. For someone who derived such pleasure from spectacle, the irony was sharp. Catherine's grand entrance had turned into a slow, very public, clumsy exit. Phones were up in seconds. Mara from next door filmed with delight. Hector streamed short clips that would later ping on neighbors' group chats. The footage captured Catherine's initial strut, and then her clearly shaken attempts to navigate past the planters without leaving bodywork scars or ego scars. She managed to back out, eventually jaw tight, and then sat in the driver's seat for an age staring at the neat line of planters as if they had personally betrayed her. She came to my porch this time, not marched in a parade of entitlement, but shuffling heels scuffing. She picked at the rim of a planter as if inspecting the craftsmanship, but the glance she gave me was all the confession I needed. "This is ridiculous, Dylan," she said, voice high. "You can't just do this." "Yes, I can," I replied pleasantly. "I checked the code. I hired a landscaper. I'm exercising my reasonable use." I placed the contractor's card on the railing like a small bureaucratic talisman. "Also, it looks nice." Her face betrayed a momentary flicker, something like respect, or maybe the recognition that she had been outplayed without bloodshed. Then the mask slipped back on and she pointed a finger like a gavel. "You'll get fined for this. I'll see to it." Two things happened then, almost at once. First half, the neighbors who had been watching chimed in, not with the sycophantic murmurs she was used to, but with pointed questions and polite, disappointed tones. "Did you think about asking Dylan?" first one asked. "It looks really great," said another, raising a phone like a banner. The second thing, the viral aspect kicked in. By noon, short clips of Catherine's awkward exit and the toppled planter were on 3 local community pages. Comments ranged from delighted to outraged, but the dominant note was ridicule. "HOA meets tasteful landscaping," read one caption. "Suburban humility," read another. The narrative was forming without Catherine's approval. What I hadn't fully anticipated was how quickly her power would evaporate in the face of an unimpeachable public record. At the next HOA meeting, an emergency session, she called in righteous anger. People arrived clutching screenshots, links, and the little uncensored live videos that social media thrives on. I brought my folder receipts, the landscaper contract, the city code email confirming the legality of my installations. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I let the evidence and the collective chuckle of the room do the heavy lifting. Catherine tried her usual tactics: bluster, plausible deniability, the wounded martyr routine. But when someone plays bully for long enough, the moment one of their victims bows out to dignity, neighbors notice. 2 women who'd always been on her committee stood up and said plainly that perhaps Catherine's behavior had been at best poor judgment. An older couple, who used to back her without question, admitted they had always resented how she wielded fines like scepters. The tide turned, not because I'd wanted it to, but because the neighborhood had finally been given the unedited footage to form their own opinion. There was fallout. Catherine did indeed threaten fines. She drafted sternly worded emails. She filed memed grievances. But with the receipts I'd presented, and a chorus of neighbors describing the pattern of her behavior, The board realized defending her would be defending bad opti, CS, and possibly a legal headache. Her closest allies found themselves shrinking into middle ground statements about communication and neighborly respect. She lost a vote on a minor committee. It wasn't a dramatic ousting, but for someone who lived on the adoration of small authority, it felt like exile. For me, the payoff was not in victory dances or gloating posts. It was quieter watching the lawn slowly recover, seeing my mailbox repaired without complaint, hearing a neighbor say over the fence, "Nice work, Dylan." The planters flourished. The gravel settled into a pretty functional line. Catherine's Suburban still cruised the street, but she avoided my corner like someone who'd learned to read social weather. Where she had once waved like a monarch, she now kept her head down. The most satisfying part, the moral imbalance had been corrected without anyone getting hurt. No spikes, no sabotage, just a homeowner who knew his rights, a little taste for tasteful design, and a community that finally got to see the story in full color. Catherine's tantrums never matched the small ripple of respect that had crept toward me. Power, I realized, is less about the title you hold and more about whether people want to follow you. I didn't celebrate loudly. I watered the new plants, clipped the boxwood, and mowed the stripes with the same care as always, each pass a small restoration of order. The victory was private and delicious. Catherine learned a lesson in humility. The neighborhood learned how to look, and my little patch of green, it felt for the first time in months like mine again. When you've lived under someone's thumb long enough, you start to believe the thumb is permanent. That was Catherine Dunn's greatest trick, convincing the neighborhood that her word was law. But after the planter incident, something shifted. The illusion cracked, and once the first hairline fracture appeared, the whole facade began to crumble. The morning after her Suburban fiasco, I went about my routine as if nothing had happened. Coffee porch, a slow walk around the yard. The planters looked dignified. The gravel settled nicely, the shrubs already giving off that established vibe that made them look like they'd been there for years. It was subtle, but I noticed neighbors taking longer glances when they walked past. Some nodded at me with quiet approval. One even gave a little thumbs up. Catherine, however, was not in the mood for subtle. By noon, a neighborhood-wide email landed in everyone's inbox. Subject line, "You are gently abused by homeowner on Willowbend Drive." The text was pure Catherine, long-winded, self-righteous, dripping with that mix of legal jargon and personal venom only she could conjure. She accused me of creating hazardous obstructions, of intentionally targeting board members with false accusations, and my personal favorite, of damaging community cohesion with performative landscaping. It would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. But this time, instead of polite silence or whispered support for her people, hit reply all. One neighbor attached the video of her Suburban awkwardly scraping the planter. Another asked if she planned to find herself for failure to maintain vehicle control. Someone else simply replied with 3 popcorn emojis. The thread exploded, not with fear, but with humor, and for the first time, Catherine's attempt to control the narrative backfired in spectacular fashion. Later that week, she doubled down. At the next HOA meeting, she stormed in with a stack of papers and the kind of dramatic sigh usually reserved for bad soap operas. I sat in the back row, folder in hand, calm as ever. She launched into her speech, condemning me for flagrant disregard of neighborhood standards and demanding an immediate vote to remove my planters. But then Mara stood up. Mara, who had spent decades teaching middle school, had the kind of voice that carried authority without raising in pitch. "With all due respect, Catherine," she said, "those planters are beautiful. They meet every guideline. And frankly, after seeing how you've been using Dylan's yard as your shortcut, I think we should be thanking him for investing in the appearance of the neighborhood." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Catherine blinked, clearly unprepared for dissent from her usual allies. She tried to cut Mara off, but then Hector raised his hand. He didn't say much, just held up his phone and played the clip of Catherine's Suburban grinding against the planter, projected loudly enough that even the board members winced. The room erupted in laughter. Actual, unrestrained laughter. That was the moment the balance of power shifted. Catherine had thrived on fear and silence, but laughter that was poison to her authority. The board, sensing the tide, did what boards always do. They hedged. "Perhaps this isn't an urgent matter," one member said, eyes darting nervously. "Maybe we should table the discussion until next month." Another suggested a review of landscaping policies. Nobody outright defended her. Catherine stood there, puttering, trying to regain her footing, but the room had already moved on. After the meeting, people I barely knew approached me. "Well played, Dylan. Smart move with the planters. She had it coming." Each comment was small, but together they painted a picture I'd never seen before. Catherine's grip on the neighborhood was loosening. Of course, she didn't go quietly. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 more violation letters, all increasingly absurd. One accused me of allowing excessive bird activity near the planters. Another cited potential tripping hazards from gravel. The last one was so desperate it accused my mailbox of being visibly resentful of community harmony. I tacked them to the fridge like ironic trophies. Meanwhile, the videos kept circulating. A neighbor's teenage son had spliced the footage into a meme overlaying dramatic music and text reading when the Ho Queen meets her match. It went semi-viral in our town's Facebook group. The humiliation spread faster than Catherine could contain it. I started noticing changes in her behavior. She still drove the Suburban like it was a tank, but now she avoided my street entirely. At community events, she arrived late, left early, and spoke less. Her once fanatical allies began to mutter about new leadership and fresh perspectives. By the time the board elections rolled around, Catherine wasn't even nominated. The official story, of course, was that she chose to step back to focus on family. But everyone knew the truth. She'd been dethroned by a row of planters, a camera, and her own arrogance. For me, the fallout was sweeter than I'd anticipated. My lawn recovered lush and green again, the scars fading under fresh growth. The planters bloomed into a burst of color that neighbors complimented regularly, and my mailbox, freshly replaced and standing straight, became a small symbol of stubborn resilience. But the best part wasn't the grass or the plants. It was the shift in how people saw me. No longer the quiet guy with the striped lawn, I was the man who stood up to Catherine Dunn and won. The man who'd played her game and beaten her without ever raising his voice. One evening, as I watered the shrubs, Hector strolled by with his daughter. He grinned, tipped an imaginary hat, and said, "Lend." It was a simple word, but it carried more weight than 100 violation letters. And though Catherine still lurked in the neighborhood, her Suburban gleaming in her driveway, she no longer looked untouchable. She looked ordinary. For a woman like Catherine, that was the harshest punishment of all. When the dust settled, I thought maybe, just maybe, the saga was over. My lawn had healed, the planters were blooming, and Catherine Dunn had been dethroned in the quietest, funniest coup our HOA had ever seen. But Catherine was Catherine, and people like her don't go down without one last swing. It started with a letter this time. Not the usual HOA stationery, but something more official, a cease and desist order. I unfolded it at my kitchen table, eyebrows raised. According to her attorney, I had engaged in harassment, defamation, and willful obstruction of community easements. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Defamation. The videos had been hers unedited, her Suburban caught in all its glory. Harassment. If defending my lawn was harassment, then half the neighborhood was guilty. And easements. The planters sat squarely on my property, confirmed by the city itself. Still, she pressed forward. She filed a complaint in small claims court. That was her final act, dragging me into a room where she thought her legal jargon and polished pearls would win over a judge. I prepped my evidence like a man sharpening tools, video clips, time-stamped photos, landscaper invoices, copies of city code, and even a few printouts of the Facebook memes purely for dramatic flair. Court day arrived. Catherine swept in like royalty. Suburban parked illegally out front, heels clicking on the linoleum floor. She looked confident, maybe even triumphant. Her lawyer, a fresh-faced young man who probably thought HOA disputes were beneath him, trailing behind. When our case was called, Catherine launched into a speech worthy of an Oscar. She described herself as a victim of a neighbor's campaign of hostility, claimed I'd endangered the community with hazardous landscaping, and even tried to suggest the videos were maliciously altered. Then it was my turn. I cleared my throat and calmly laid out the facts. Video evidence receipts, city code confirmations. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was so absurdly one-sided it practically spoke itself. When I showed the clip of her Suburban clipping the planter and then juxtaposed it with her violation letters citing me for lawn neglect, even the judge chuckled. The ruling swift and brutal. Case dismissed. Catherine ordered to pay my filing fees. That was the twist I hadn't anticipated. Not just surviving Catherine's wrath, but watching her implode under the weight of her own arrogance. She walked out of that corridor. Red-faced her lawyer, avoiding eye contact. The click of her heels less sharp now. For a woman who thrived on image, losing in public was worse than any fine. Back in the neighborhood, the story spread faster than wildfire. The memes evolved screenshots of the court ruling captions like "Objection overruled ego" and "Catherine v. Common Sense." For the first time in years, people openly joked about her. The fear was gone, replaced by a collective relief that the reign of the HOA queen had ended. Her power evaporated in weeks. She resigned from the board for personal reasons. The Suburban, once her rolling throne, sat unused in her driveway for days at a time. She started walking more head down, avoiding conversations. The woman who once controlled the neighborhood narrative now couldn't control the snickers that followed her down the street. And me, I didn't need to rub it in. I kept tending my lawn, watering the planters, and waving politely whenever neighbors passed. The satisfaction wasn't in Catherine's downfall. It was in the simple peace of knowing I'd taken back control without stooping to her level. The lawn stripes were straight again. The grass was green, and my mornings no longer started with the sound of an engine tearing through my sanctuary. The best part, though, came a month later. I was mowing one Saturday morning when a new couple walked up. They were moving into the house down the street. "You're Dylan, right?" the husband asked. I nodded. He grinned. The guy who stood up to Catherine, we heard all about it. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud, not just of the lawn, not just of the planters, but of the lesson I'd managed to prove. You don't need Ed to shout to win. Sometimes all you need is patience, creativity, and the willingness to let arrogance trip over itself. As I waved them off and finished mowing, I glanced at the planters glowing in the sunday. They weren't just decoration anymore. They were symbols, a reminder that, even in the pettiest battles, dignity can be the sharpest weapon of all. What started as tire tracks across my lawn turned into something much bigger, a test of patience, principle, and persistence. Looking back, it would have been easy to lose my temper, to scream at Catherine in the street, to turn it into a war of noise. But noise was her weapon, not mine. By choosing to fight differently with preparation, evidence, and a little creative landscaping, I not only protected my property, but also stripped away the illusion of her power. There's a lesson in that one I wish I'd learned earlier. Arrogance always carries the seeds of its own defeat. When someone believes they're untouchable, they stop being careful. They push too far, they laugh too loud, and eventually they expose themselves. All you need to do is be ready when that moment comes. To anyone dealing with their own Catherine, whether it's an HOA tyrant, a difficult boss, or just someone who thinks rules are for everyone but them, remember this. You don't need to outshout them. You need to outlast them. Keep your calm. Document everything. Be patient. And when the time is right, let their arrogance be the trap they can't escape. If you've ever faced a situation like this, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. Let's trade battle scars. And if you enjoyed mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, there are HOA dramas, more Karens, and more tales of petty revenge just waiting to be told. Because at the end of the day, justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it blooms quietly in a row of planters,